Welcome to episode 38 of Mitolife Radio. I'm your host, Matt Blackburn, and today I'm speaking with Tim Burzens of Amplified Vitality. He has a YouTube channel that is really awesome, and I came across his work while I was studying Dr. Raymond Peat and the information about carbon dioxide, stress, PUFA, sugar, all of those things. So Tim has really great videos that breaks it down in simple to understand terms. He actually has a great video on aspirin that I recommend watching. And we talk about that a little bit in the interview. We also talk about the keto diet, the ketogenic diet, talk about vitamin E. We talk about PUFAs, choline, how the liver detoxes PUFAs. We talk about niacin, saturated fat, cholesterol, digestion. We actually go through a pretty lengthy Q&A at the end that I think you guys will like. As you'll see, Tim kind of has a different perspective, and that's kind of how I live my life, is I don't just take someone's protocol or what they recommend and just go with that 100%. Tim's kind of the same way. So he actually talks about eating lighter in the beginning of the day and then eating heavier at the end of the day, which is interesting. I definitely notice if I have a really big meal for breakfast and lunch, I'm kind of sluggish. So I do tend to eat most of my fat and protein at night, although I do like some grass-fed beef and eggs during the day. So you guys will love it. Here is Tim Burzens. All right, I'm here with Tim Burzens. Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, man. Thanks for coming on. It's been an interesting year for me diving into this information that's not only Ray Peat inspired, but it really goes way back, right, to all these people, Rhoda Barnes, Albert St. Georgie, that people just haven't looked at. And there's like this keto fad that's happening right now that I've kind of been speaking out about. And carnivore diet's really big right now, and just cutting out, restricting carbohydrates. And You've been studying this for years, right? Like health in the context of stress and energy, generating more energy to be healthy.
Yeah, and you know, well, what you just said, I think that there's actually always kind of been this battle between like what the underlying science is like really pointing to, and then what the mainstream kind of catches on, or like what the primary message that gets propagated throughout, you know, what everyone starts to tell each other in society. So like you said, Albert St. Georgie, Rhoda Barnes, they've known for a long time that thyroid, metabolism, like there's this system, this underlying system of how the body works, that if you look at that, a lot of problems start to make sense and you can start to solve them. But then the mainstream jumps on like, well, if we have this one specific drug or this one specific thing, then all of a sudden we can, you know, solve the problem this way. And it doesn't really look at the totality of the organism to understand like the bigger picture of it all. But yeah, so as far as me though, I've been studying health pretty much my entire life. Even when I was like in third grade, I was like obsessed with like how the heart worked and all this stuff. So like a long time ago, but then recently, or after college, went through, you know, like the fitness phase, and then went too far down into like terrible metabolism states from like overworking, overexercise, undereating, starvation diet type of thing. And that led me into the work of Ray Peat, who I know that you talk about a lot on this podcast. And, you know, he really ties together a lot of the bioenergetics and metabolism. So like that really connected a lot of the pieces for me and helped me to like finally understand from the deeper level, okay, that's what's happening. This is why I'm getting the effects I'm having. And, you know, a lot of stuff started to make sense when that became a, you know, part of my life.
That's awesome. Yeah. I like how this information, like bioenergetics, using, you know, oxidizing carbohydrate, lowering stress, it's a much more connected way to view health, because I come from the raw vegan space and I did all these crazy detox protocols, countless enemas, countless sauna sessions. And it was always about like taking herbs and doing these detox protocols to heal. But I don't think people like to hear that the solution could be more simple, right? Like actually just generate energy, and then whatever X condition you have will usually get better, right?
Yeah. And you can go down like all the rabbit holes of why. And that's like, you know, it can get complicated if you really want to know all the biochemistry of it. But at the very core basic level, it's really not that complicated. It's reduce stress, you know, live a happier life, eat healthy foods with plenty of vitamins and minerals, get your carbohydrates, get some exercise in, like all the basic stuff, get your sunlight. This is like stuff that if you tell someone like, oh, how do you get healthy? And you tell them these basic things, they're going to want a more complicated answer. You know what I mean? Like people want to have a more complicated, more in-depth like routine. And it's really not that complicated, but there are pitfalls that people fall into. Like you said, with keto, I think that there's like a lot of good arguments from the science of why keto could be good for you. And I think that, you can't throw it out completely, but it is worth noting that they also jump over a lot of pieces that are like really necessary to understand. Like you can't just throw out the fact that free fatty acids reduce insulin sensitivity, for example. So if you're on a keto diet, your insulin sensitivity is going to go down. Like just as an example, like there's those kind of pieces that seem to get brushed over, I think.
Yeah. Did you do keto for a while yourself?
I did. Yeah, I had a coach. This is when I got to my absolute leanest, where I was like miserable. I got there for like a week, and it was the hardest diet I had ever done. And then he switched me into like a cheat day type of system where you had like one cheat day a week, and that just was terrible. Like the amount of food, the quantity of food I would eat on that cheat day was like ungodly. It was ridiculous.
That's hilarious. Yeah, that's a good point you made about the free fatty acids. And I know I like Chris Masterjohn. You're probably familiar, and he has a great like little video on how oxidizing like omegas, or PUFA, you use 50% more water and you make 50% less CO2. And I think that's just a really small piece that people are missing with cellular metabolism. Like they don't think in terms of carbon dioxide. And that's one of the first videos I saw on your awesome YouTube channel was about CO2 and the benefits of it, how to increase it. And I think that's really like a basic thing to know with health, right?
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, if you want to like look back in the terms of like how evolution happened, we had like the bacteria that were anaerobes that didn't use oxygen, so therefore didn't produce carbon dioxide. And then as the organisms like became more complex and evolved into more complex forms, there were higher and higher levels of respiration, which is the use of oxygen to create carbon dioxide. So then it starts to become clear that using oxygen to produce carbon dioxide is a more efficient energy pathway. And then following that trail, you understand that like more complex life requires more complex respiration, more complex metabolism. And then ultimately down to the point where humans are one of the most complex organisms there is, especially with the brain. The fact that we can think analytically and logically, that requires so much extra energy. And so thinking about it from those terms, you start to see that if you're the amount that you're able to produce that carbon dioxide and use the oxygen, because those two go together. When you produce more carbon dioxide, you're able to use more oxygen. So when you have that high rate of oxygen consumption and carbon dioxide production, then you actually are operating to fuel all of the complex systems of the organism. When you get into the stress metabolism, which is only meant to be a quick little shot of extra energy, then if you get into that metabolism too long and it stays turned on for too long, then you end up getting to a place where the complex systems of the human body that have evolved to be using this higher form of energy are no longer able to function in the way that they were supposed to function. So even just from a basic understanding of evolution and metabolism, we can see that respiration metabolism, high oxygen consumption, high carbon dioxide production is like so important to have like a really healthy body, really, really rip-roaring health and metabolism and everything.
That was an awesome explanation. And I like how you call it the stress metabolism, because I think that's where people's ears will perk up. Because last year, I think I mentioned on some of my shows, like I took intermittent fasting to the extreme, and I only ate for 1 hour a day for like, 6 months.
Yeah, I've been there. I've been there.
And I totally crashed. It was like, I had zero resilience to stress. And so that's kind of what led me to Ray Peat's information to be more open to this. Cause I thought it was just kind of woo-woo and not, just kind of pseudoscience. But when I actually crashed from working on this backup system, because that's what keto is, right? It's a stress metabolism backup system. And people are like, ketones are the preferred fuel, but it's really glucose, right? It's the preferred fuel.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. And, ketones can be used for fuel, but I don't think they're supposed to be used for fuel for the long term. It just, the science doesn't really add up there, especially when you understand that in order to produce ketones, you have to get into such a stressed out state in the first place. You have to be basically destroying your insulin sensitivity and your ability to oxidize carbs in order to even get to that place in the first place.
Did you ever do like Bulletproof, or do you take like MCT? Because I know there are some benefits to like it has less PUFA than coconut oil.
Yeah, I think I remember reading something from, or maybe listening to something from Ray Peat about. I think he said hydrogenated coconut oil, which was basically a coconut oil that was completely saturated, so no PUFAs at all, and that the life expectancy of, like, I think it was a study on mice, but the mice that had the hydrogenated coconut oil would have the longest lifespans, whereas even with coconut oil, the lifespan was reduced a little bit. And then obviously with like the vegetable oils, they were like way reduced. As far as Bulletproof goes, I think MCTs do have some good benefits to them. I don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater and say that all fat-based diets are bad or wrong, or that you should limit your fat. I think there's something to be said to having an open mindset and like seeing all the different puzzle pieces, not judging them, just kind of holding on to them, seeing where they fit into the bigger picture. Maybe it doesn't fit into your paradigm right now, and then later on something else changes and you look and you say, oh, okay, yeah, like this old piece that I was just kind of like letting chill for a little while now makes sense to me because I have raised to a new context.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I've been getting questions the last few days. It's funny, people think Ray Peat created a diet. They're like, I don't do well on 2 liters of orange juice. I'm like, he never said drink 2 liters of orange
yeah.
juice.
You got to think for yourself. Yeah.
Right. But I think there's a lot of confusion. People think Ray Peat's thing is high carb, and I know he does skim milk. But what are your thoughts on, like, some people ask me, like, does saturated fat block sugar from entering the cell? But I think it's the PUFA. It's not the saturated fats that do that, right? Saturated fat actually helps, or?
I think there's a little bit of confusion, I think, between triglycerides and cholesterol and then free fatty acids. So the Randall cycle is if I'm not mistaken, is a cycle that free fatty acids block glucose from entering the cell, and conversely, glucose will block free fatty acids. So basically, they compete to get into the cell. And this is one of those pieces that a lot of like the literature just kind of it's well documented in the literature, but then people who are in like the low carb group and the low carb circles completely glaze over this fact. And so basically, if there's too much fat in the blood, then the carbs won't be able to enter the cells. And so like it's well documented, very well proven, and yet it seems to just be glossed over all the time. But the difference between triglycerides and free fatty acids are that when you eat saturated fats, or really any fat, it gets absorbed into the small intestine, and it doesn't form free fatty acids. It forms triglycerides, which is 3 free fatty acids connected to a glycerol backbone. And so that's like the main way that it's stored in fat cells and in like intramuscular cells and stuff like that. So the intramuscular fat and adipose tissue fat is the triglycerides, and those can also be in the blood as well. So as far as I know, those don't actually have an effect on whether glucose can enter the cell or not. But the burning of fat, which is the liberation of fat from either adipose tissue or the muscle cells into free fatty acids, which then float around in the bloodstream, that is what's going to block your glucose absorption, which makes sense because eating fat wouldn't necessarily be something that would biomechanically make sense to reduce your insulin sensitivity. But burning fat would, because if you're needing to tap into your fat stores, you're under some sort of stress. And that means that your body needs to reserve the glucose for the important cells, the important tissues that can only run on glucose and that are more highly evolved to run on glucose.
Awesome explanation. Yeah. Do you know who Shawn Baker is? The carnivore
No,
guy?
I don't know.
he's promoting the carnivore diet, and he eats, he's talked about eating like 16 burger patties from In-N-Out, which is kind of better than he goes to Wendy's and stuff on the road. But I think, and what's funny is on Instagram, one of his stories, he's like, they use too much cheese because he just gets, the patty. And I guess he's trying to avoid even the sugar in the cheese. I was like, this is getting to a ridiculous level.
Yeah, like cheese really does not have much sugar in it to begin with. Yeah.
Right. So I think I like what you said about liberating free fatty acids from the fat. That will block sugar from entering the cell. And so that's really what these carnivore people and keto people have to get, right? It's like your body will eat itself to make sugar if you don't give it sugar, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. And I think that those kind of like quick little soundbite things like your body is going to eat itself to make sure, like that is exactly right. And that is the best way to understand it, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. Have you studied like anti-aging and longevity? Because I used to, that's my focus still. It's just a passion of mine. It's just a fun challenge, to set the bar really high just for fun and try to, live hundreds of years or whatever in the most natural way I can.
Yeah, of course.
Like,
Yeah.
I used to come from like a restrictive mindset of like caloric restriction, restricting carbs. But now that this whole world's opened up, it's like more carbs, right? And like actually feed the system energy so that it can restructure itself, right?
Yeah. I think, so I've seen, obviously there's, it's hard to separate longevity talk from health because they're so tied together. I haven't necessarily focused on it specifically, but I do know that some of the arguments around longevity being, the caloric restriction, I don't know if this is their exact argument, but I know there's an argument that cells can only, reproduce so many times. And so after a certain amount of time, the cells are just done. And so you die. So if you slow down your metabolism, you slow down the cell turnover rate, and therefore you live a longer life. But that is a very flawed concept. There's nothing that says that a cell can't keep duplicating if it doesn't have the signal to do so. I think that what you end up running into if you do caloric restriction for longevity is that the cell becomes because it's such a slower turnover rate of the cells, your tissues become so much less adaptable to the environment. Because if you think about the cell being made up of the tissue being made up of a bunch of different cells, then the ability for the tissue to say, this cell can die so I can make a new cell that is mutated in a way that can now handle this new stress. The quicker you can let those cells die and make those the new cells, the faster the tissue is going to evolve and change into the new form. And that only happens when there's a higher rate of energy flowing through the cell, which means that you're eating more carbs and that you're having more energy going through it. So like the caloric restriction model of longevity, I don't necessarily think is a good way to go about it. I know that Ray Pete has said he thinks a lot of that has to do with lowering the fat content and the PUFA content. And so therefore you have less of the free radicals and the inflammation and all that good stuff. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. I used to do ice baths and I kind of took a break, 55 degree Fahrenheit for 20 minutes or whatever. And that's the argument with cryotherapy or cold thermogenesis is that you're killing off the weak cells, or, the sick cells, the dying cells, and then you're creating
and fasting too. It's also that way with fasting. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Have you looked into like lipofuscin? Because autophagy is such a buzzword, and lipofuscin is like iron and PUFA combined, like oxidized with I think some other proteins, and it's kind of scary because it's like calcification, but it's been linked with Alzheimer's, with diabetes. It's the main component of non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, and that's the thing I've been kind of studying is like the lipofuscin, like the oxidized PUFA, and it starts complexing with all this stuff in your tissue.
Yeah, I do know that the polyunsaturated fats and especially iron in its reduced form is pretty dangerous. I don't know specifically about that. I haven't necessarily done a lot of research into that side of things.
It's a rabbit hole.
Yeah. Oh, I'm sure. Yeah. I'm probably going to like dive into that in the next day or two. But yeah, that's there's actually a really interesting argument for the rate of disease increasing because of the fortification of grains with reduced iron. And so now if I ever go to the store, I'm going to have like pasta or something, I'll try to get the imported stuff, like the stuff from like it's the German, whatever, something from Europe, because they don't fortify their grains with iron. And so not only does it taste better, but it's also, you're not getting, all the reduced iron that's now oxidizable in your body. So.
Yeah. It's a scary thing. Your PUFA video is one of the first ones I saw. Are PUFAs making your fat stores toxic? And I've been kind of educating people on PUFAs and how to kind of detox from it or mitigate it, or just to how to think of health in context of limiting PUFAs, polyunsaturated fats. And in the video, I liked how you kind of said it's a slow process, right? You can't really get them out quickly.
Yeah. The overall fat turnover in your body is about 3 to 4 years for most people. So if you were to take every single meal that you ever had over the past 3 to 4 years and do the percentages of the amount of saturated fats, monounsaturated fats, and polyunsaturated fats, then the total fat in your body right now would pretty accurately reflect those meals that you had. So if you think about that, if you start eating a low PUFA diet and you start eating more saturated fats for the next week, well, you've changed a little, but you've changed the percentage of a week compared to 3 to 4 years. So it's not something that you can say like, oh, I've been great on my diet and I haven't had PUFAs for 3 days. Like, okay, well, that's awesome, but like it's really a long-term play. So if it's not sustainable, then I would much rather have someone eat a little bit of PUFA in a sustainable way than try to be like super hard about it and not have any PUFA for like a week and then give up, because it's much more of a long-term process.
Yeah, I always tell people too, it's like the ratio, like don't get too neurotic about it. But as long as you're eating more saturated fat than unsaturated fat, and then being sure to keep the liver full of glycogen and get your choline, to me, those are like kind of the most important things. Would you agree?
Definitely. And if you are having a high polyunsaturated fat meal, like if you're going to go out to a restaurant or something, take a vitamin E capsule with you. It's super easy. I had some roommates back in Florida when I was working with a company down there, a supplement company. And we were all into the repeat stuff and we lived together. So it was like our supplement cabinet was like crazy. Our fridge was just full of like all peat foods and all metabolism foods. It was actually pretty fun. But we would literally take like aspirin and vitamin E and like things like that if we would ever go out to eat, because we wanted to just take that little extra precaution to make sure we were giving our body the ability to handle the PUFAs and stuff.
That's awesome. And it's so funny you bring up vitamin E, not to make this a sales pitch, but actually I'm releasing a product today called PUFA Protect.
Oh, nice. That's a good name. I like that.
Thanks. Yeah, it's a non-GMO sunflower derived, just basic vitamin E. And I'll probably upgrade it, as I go, but it's changed my life. And the research on vitamin E, it's kind of suppressed. Like there was a great book I had where it went into the research of Dr. Shute up in Canada, Shute, I believe.
Mm-hmm. I've seen that name. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like a treatment for heart disease. And it's interesting that fish oil kind of came in when vitamin E went down in the 70s. Like vitamin E was big, and then the fish oil industry came in and just squashed it. And
oh, wow.
Yeah, they're kind of like polar opposites, right?
Yeah, they are, definitely. Yeah. And I wonder if, so I know that a lot of the polyunsaturated fats and seed oils come with vitamin E because the seed has vitamin E to protect it from the instability of the polyunsaturated fats. I don't know about fish oil though. I don't think that has vitamin E in it, does it?
Not to my knowledge. Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up because I wanted to talk about like I'm obsessed with the fat-soluble vitamins, and I've had Morley Robbins on 3 times. About to have him on again. He's a mineral expert, but he's very pro A, like retinol, and kind of anti-D, especially supplementation. Because if you take D when you're magnesium deficient, you could just get more calcified.
I think that all the supplements, especially when it comes to fat soluble, it gets really tricky. It's really tricky about like if you should supplement or not. Like, I've even seen. I know you were talking with Danny Roddy on the podcast about Matt Stone and some of the Matt Stone stuff, and he has been releasing a lot of information about anti-vitamin A, about how a vitamin A deficient diet can heal. And I haven't really gone into that to see what the argument is behind that, but it just gets a little complicated when there's, A and D need to be in balance. And then like, if you, supplement with one, or how much sunlight are you getting, or like, what's your metabolism? It's just, there's so many variables going on. It's pretty hard to know how to handle it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that generally E and K are safe to supplement.
I agree.
Like you said, E is really hard to get, and especially in the range of 400 IUs, and that's really all you need to like neutralize a canola oil steak meal, right? If you go out to eat or something.
For sure, yeah.
I take 4 just in case, but
yeah, got to be if you can, why not? It's like vitamin E is not going to hurt you. Vitamin E is really, really healthy. So
yeah. Have you experimented with taking like K2? Because I've been taking like MK7 form, which is kind of like a bone targeting one. My friends sell it, and it's like 320 micrograms, so it's a good dose. And I interviewed the guy that developed it, and I feel it's like amazing for if you have a cavity forming or any kind of dental issue. It's usually like K.
Oh yeah, that's super interesting. I have experimented with K2. It's MK4 and MK7. Those are the two. And then there's and then K2 is obviously more about calcium and bone, whereas K is about clotting. So typically, if I'm taking aspirin, for example, because aspirin has blood thinning qualities, I'll take a super complex of K that has vitamin K and then K2 in both MK4 and MK7. I think it's like a life extension brand. And it because it has all of them, it's like just a pretty safe bet to make sure you're getting all the K vitamins in.
That's awesome. Well, it's a good segue because I wanted to pick your brain on aspirin. You have a whole video on it, and
yeah, aspirin's pretty incredible. It's a pretty incredible substance. Yeah,
I have like a Daniel Vitalis, like a rewilding friend. Well, I don't want to label him like that, but he's like a forager, a hunter, just very like connected. He knows how to live on the land. His name's Ben Belty, and he kind of got into Ray Peat's work, and he's been studying acetyl salicylic acid and just salicylic acid in general. He was saying that used to be a heavy part of our diet. Like that would be in the flesh of animals that ate the plants that contained it.
Oh,
and
wow.
something happened. And so we're actually not getting it anymore. So people think of it like a pharmaceutical, right? Like a super synthetic, super toxic. They put it in with Tylenol and stuff, but it's relatively safe, right?
Yeah. Even Hippocrates would use white willow bark, which has salicin, which is the salicylic acid is the active component derivative from salicin in white willow bark. They would use that as a pain reliever and fever reducer, inflammation reducer. And so like it's been used for a very long time. It is a pretty natural compound. And that's really interesting about it being in animals though, because I actually wonder if that has anything to do with the connection to mead acid, because salicylic acid, which is the active component in aspirin, will mimic the downstream effects of mead acid. And mead acid is the unsaturated fatty acid that your own body produces when it's deficient in external or exogenous PUFAs or unsaturated fats. And so basically, if you're, they think that it's a sign of essential fatty acid deficiency, which if you want to look at it that way, like you could make that argument. But the question is, are the essential fatty acids essential? And if they're not essential, then maybe your body's production of its own unsaturated fatty acid is, you know, the actual one that you want and not the one that's coming from these external sources.
Great point. Yeah. I get some questions from people sometimes. They're like, so where do I get my omega-3s? It's like, you don't worry about it. And
yeah.
I tell them like iron and iodine is kind of the same thing, right? Like Morley Robbins says we only need 1 milligram of iron per day in the mouth, which is impossible to not get, you know, if you're eating anything, I don't know, eggs, meat, and iodine. I mean, people doing transdermal iodine, and that's like super dangerous for the thyroid to do high dose. That's my current understanding is like essential fatty acids, iodine and iron. Don't worry about them.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, and the one thing with iodine, I haven't necessarily dove into the depths of this yet to figure out my opinion on it, but I have read a book called Healing is Voltage. By I think Jerry Tennant or Joshua Tennant, yeah. And he has some crazy ideas in that book. So I don't like buy it hook, line, and sinker. It's kind of like, okay, let me think about this for a little bit and see how it fits into the bigger context. But he recommends doing a high dose iodine flush for a while. And I've had friends that tried it. I don't know if they got results from it. I haven't tried it yet. It wouldn't be something that I would do unless I was like 100% sure about it, because I'm sure it could have some bad side effects if you aren't careful.
Yeah, I think it's the kind of the idea with it is you flush out halogens, I believe. So everyone's bathing and drinking, you know, bromine, chlorine. So
yeah,
this is like supposedly pushes them out. I don't know. That's the theory anyway. But I think there's safer ways to do that.
Yeah, I would agree. Yeah, just get your liver healthy. Your liver will do it all for you.
And speaking of the liver, I wanted to hit on choline real quick. That's something that I really haven't really thought about the last 10 years during my health journey. And I just started eating more eggs, and choline for the liver is just incredible, right? For that glucuronidation that you talk about in your video, that's like the main process where the liver kicks out these PUFAs, right?
Yeah. Well, glucuronidation and methylation are the two major products. And actually there's an argument against taking high doses of niacin, because when you pee out the niacin that you don't use, you're actually taking out methyl products with it, because the liver needs to use the methyl groups in order to reduce the niacin amount. And the methyl groups are the main way that your liver excretes toxins, that and glucuronidation. So you definitely need to have your liver working in that way. But I think even more importantly, choline is important for cholesterol synthesis. And so when you eat like a lot of sugar or a lot of alcohol, there's always this the possibility that instead of burning it or storing it as glycogen, that your liver stores it as fat. And so like if your liver is really fatty, then obviously it starts to slow down, become congested. When that happens, it stops responding to carbs as well, because now there's too much fat, so the carbs can't get into the cell. And then so your insulin sensitivity tanks, and this is metabolic syndrome, right? This is like the core of metabolic syndrome is around the liver. And so if you take choline, and assuming that you also have the proper vitamin and minerals to for your liver to do this, your liver will take that fat and export it into the bloodstream as LDL cholesterol. And so so if you can take extra choline, then you have the chance of defatifying the liver and producing more cholesterol. And then you can get into the whole argument about like if blood cholesterol, high blood cholesterol is bad or not. And it really depends on if you're using it properly or not. And I think that's way bigger of a key point there that most people miss.
Yeah, it's my understanding you need retinol or vitamin A and thyroid to combine with the cholesterol to make your steroid hormones.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and so obviously you want the liver to. It's almost like you can think of it like there's a stream, and where is it getting dammed up? There's food. Food goes in, sugar and alcohol, for example, carbs go into the liver. The liver can take that and turn it into cholesterol. Then the cholesterol in the bloodstream can combine with thyroid and vitamin A to create the steroid hormones. And then the steroid hormones really produces pregnenolone, the mother steroid hormone. And then that either goes to the positive steroids or it goes past the positive steroids into the negative steroids. And so you see this stream. I know that was a lot of information, but it's a stream from the food all the way to the steroid hormones. Where is it getting dammed up? If your cholesterol's high, then you're not producing steroid hormones enough. If your liver is fatty, well, then you're not converting the fat into the cholesterol. If you have too much estrogen or too much cortisol, well, now you're actually going past the positive steroids and you're moving into the negative steroids. So you haven't captured the positive steroids in their positive form and instead have like allowed them to degrade into their stress hormone. So it starts to give you kind of a different view about like how, like, where are you dammed up? Where's the I don't know, where's the stoppage?
That was a great explanation. That was really great. Yeah, because I get messages from people like freaking out. I have high cholesterol, and it's really low cholesterol that's the issue, where you risk a heart attack and stuff, right? Because you have super low cholesterol, like under 100. I think that your risk for cardiac arrest goes through the roof. So
it's wild because like everyone thinks high cholesterol is heart attack, and it's something like 50% of high cholesterol get heart attack. 50% of low cholesterol get heart attack. And so it's like there's actually no sign at all that cholesterol is related to it, at least not directly.
Yeah. One question I had for you out of curiosity, say someone's drinking a lot of beer and eating a PUFA diet, they can have alcoholic and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease at the same time, right? It's just a double hit on the liver.
Yeah, I don't know if there's actually a difference between like physiologically, if there's a difference. I think it's just that your liver's storing storing either alcohol or sugar as fat. But yeah,
liver's toast
theoretically. Yeah. But also what you should, yeah, exactly. Liver is going to be just terrible. You have like a big basket of fries fried in canola oil and you're chugging a beer with it, which also has all the phytoestrogens in it. So now you're like getting hit from every angle. Yeah, your liver's just going to be toast. But there was one thing you said there about the polyunsaturated fats and fatty liver disease, and that is that the saturated fats will actually protect against fatty liver disease. There was a study, Chris Masterjohn actually was talking about it, where they fed the rats all high saturated fat diet, and none of them got fatty liver disease. But if there was even a little bit of the canola oil, then the polyunsaturated fats, then they would develop it almost immediately. So it's pretty wild. And then there's also studies, like, this is kind of going down a tangent a little bit, but there are some studies that say that saturated fat causes fatty liver disease. And if you dive into the abstract or dive into the actual study, you notice that they use corn oil as a saturated fat, and that is not a saturated fat at all.
I've seen that. I think Danny Roddy brought that up. And then I interviewed my friend Kyle Mamunis on the culture of science. It's so funny on Instagram. I don't know if you're on there, but I get into these battles, and it's always show me the study. That's what it ends up as. And a lot of it
Yeah.
is vegans and talking about how protein's needed from, animal foods or saturated fat. And it's just like these battle of studies, and it seems to just go nowhere. Right.
Yeah. It's almost like, I understand the science needing science for credibility,
Mhm.
but I think that it goes too far where you've started to become too reliant on it. You haven't actually started thinking for yourself and like understanding how these systems work. And especially because certain principles aren't going to be shown in a study as well as they would be completely described in a biology textbook. Like a biology textbook, you're not going to have a study that proves that mitochondria are responsible for respiration in the cell. A study is not going to prove that because it's known, it's in the biology textbook. If you know that in the biology, then you can start to view the studies with that new lens, that new context. But otherwise, you're just using them as like ammo. You're just trying to use the science as ammo.
Yeah, and I think going by experience too, I think a lot of people on these extreme diets, that are so emotionally attached, they'll eventually crash. And so I try to be gentle with them and just like share the information and like, look, like you're headed for a brick wall.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good point.
I had a question for you about you had a video on ox bile recently, and I think I've taken that a few times. What are your thoughts on like taking betaine hydrochloride or uh, stomach acid in general? I know like proteins required to make it, right?
Yeah. So, well, betaine is the one part of the molecule, which is a methylation group. I think that can be converted into choline for the liver. The hydrochloric acid part is the actual acid that breaks down the stomach, breaks down the food in the stomach. I think they have their place. I have had good results when I've tried it a couple times, and then it seems like after a while they just kind of stop working, at least for me anyway. And I think that's kind of natural because once you restart your own body's natural hydrochloric acid production, then you won't need the supplement anymore, obviously. But also, it's way more important to take or to produce. And so this actually is a bit even bigger point, but I'll explain this and then I'll explain the bigger point is that to produce hydrochloric acid, you have to take the hydrogen out of the blood and combine it with chloride to put it into the stomach. Then, when the stomach acid is done digesting it, the bile acids will the bile acids will deacidify the hydrochloric acid when it makes its way to the small intestine, and so therefore dumping the hydrogen back into the blood. And so you have this natural balance of hydrogen going in and out of the blood. If you're taking hydrochloric acid and acidifying the blood externally, well, now you're putting an extra acid load on your body. And so now you're throwing your acid base balance out of whack a little bit. And so it's much better to produce it yourself than to take it exogenously. And that's the way bigger point when it comes to all things, all hormones, all processes of the body, is that if you produce it naturally, you're taking one substance and converting it into another substance. So you're naturally lowering one substance and raising the one that you want. When you take something externally, you're now preventing the initial substance from being turned into that substance. And therefore, you're not really creating the same physiological state because now you have probably high of both of those substances. The one that really sparks in my mind is Ray Peat's arguments around melatonin and how I wasn't entirely sure if that was. I'm still trying to figure out my position on this because serotonin will get converted into melatonin, and melatonin does have benefits for sleep. So if serotonin is getting converted to melatonin, that means you're lowering your serotonin, and it's getting converted into a potentially helpful sleep aid, melatonin. That doesn't mean that you go take external melatonin because now you're keeping your serotonin levels high, but it kind of gives you that, you're starting to see that like bigger picture of how it's way more important for your body to produce it than to take it externally, and why supplements need to be something that are not just taken too liberally, I think.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, it's my understanding when you're under stress, everything just goes down, right? Like not even, I mean, thyroid hormone conversion, but even your hydrochloric acid production and your digestive enzyme production. And so
Yeah.
maybe in like a healing process, you could use some tools like that. And then after you're out, I actually sell systemic enzymes and digestive enzymes, just a little disclaimer, but I've been taking them for years. And I think if you're traveling or you're just under a higher stress load, they can be helpful. But I love your point that you shouldn't have to rely on them forever.
It's definitely worth noticing the healing phase versus the healthy phase. And then also recognizing that when you're in the healthy phase, you could get knocked back down into the stress a little bit more. And so it's helpful to have those tools, have a toolbox. And that's really what I use supplements for at this point. There's really not many supplements that I take consistently. It's more of tools in my toolbox. So if something happens, or if I'm about to eat a meal, or I'm about to have a really tough workout or something, I might use some tools in my toolbox to help mitigate that stress, rather than like using it all the time to keep myself constantly relying on these supplements.
I love it. That's awesome. Well,
yeah.
I think we should jump into the Q&A because it's probably going to take a while.
Yeah, sure.
Because you give great long answers, and so we should have time to get through most of these.
Yeah.
Let's see. I keep hearing that when people hit 50 or 60, age 50 or 60, their metabolism slows down and they begin to struggle with weight. Is there any way for them to combat this and heal their metabolism at that age, like 50 or 60?
Yeah, I don't necessarily think that there is any like magical age where these things start to happen. I think that when you really look at what aging is, there is a natural process of the body, of course, but there's no reason that you can't stay youthful all the way up until the end. And so what aging really is, when we think about it from the bigger picture, is an accumulation of stress that has not been released, or that has not been recovered from or healed from. And so if you imagine that every single stress that has come onto you, you've held on to and you haven't let it go, then over time, that accumulation starts to degrade those complex functions of the body that we were talking about, making you more like that original anaerobe bacteria that wasn't complex at all. That was a very simple life form. So you're simplifying your life form and becoming less and less evolved by doing that, to the point where the human body cannot be sustained at that complex level anymore. And so instead starts to degrade. Those complex systems start to degrade, and you start to basically age and die. By releasing the stress, which means by doing things like eating right, making sure you're getting your exercise and providing your body with all those nutritional requirements. But then I think this is actually far more important, is to release the emotional stress that you've been gaining over your years, because the emotional stress that you hold on to is causing far more problems than the majority of the physical things. If you had some trauma that happened 40 years ago and it changed who you were and your personality, and you became bitter because of that trauma, and now you've been living 40 years of being bitter, well, guess what? That bitterness is causing you to age a lot faster, and your metabolism is going to be falling down because of that. If you can release that stress, you can actually heal from it and restore your body back into that higher level. But to do that requires the willingness to sit with the emotions and no longer be afraid of those emotions from this trauma that happened so long ago, even if it was something huge. If you continue feeling like you were a victim and that they were wrong and all this other stuff, you're going to be continuing to perpetuate those same neuronal patterns in your brain that are sparking the same emotional energy fields within the body, and therefore having the same stressful reactions that are continuing to age your body over time. So it really becomes a matter of it becomes a matter of starting to become aware of the emotions and the thoughts, and starting to release those, while you're also taking care of your body with some of the things that we've been talking about to keep your metabolism high.
I love that, man. I'm really glad you brought up those points. And I haven't watched your video yet, but you recently put one up, I think a month ago, called "How Guilt Causes Disease," and I'm excited to watch that. And
I think
a lot of people are in relationships they don't want to be in right now, abusive physically or emotionally. They're not moving when they need to. They're staying in the same toxic environment, even if it's just purely physical, or working at a job they hate. And I think that's like, I'm moving out of state for the first time in a month, and it's scary to me, but I know that I have to do it, because it's an uncomfortable thing and it's a growth thing.
Yeah, of course. And that's one of the big things, is how do you approach those situations in life that are scary? Are you afraid to feel the emotions? Because really, like, what is life? What is the fear of life or the fear of these things happening? It's really the fear of the emotions that come along with it. So if you start to take responsibility for your consciousness, and even if someone did wrong you in some way, on the surface level, someone did something and it was wrong and you got hurt from it. Well, if you're taking responsibility for your consciousness, then you'll recognize that holding on to that is hurting you. So why do you want to hold on to it? Because they need to be punished? Well, it's hurting. You're going to hurt yourself so that you're going to punish yourself so that they get punished. That doesn't make any sense. Like, you have to take responsibility for your consciousness and decide to let these things go and be free and be willing to feel the emotions, be willing to face the emotions. And then therefore, when you do that, start to see that you are actually not your emotions and that they are happening within the space that is your conscious awareness.
That's awesome. Yeah, I interviewed Adam Bergstrom a few times. He's a big Pete fan.
Oh,
and
yeah.
he says that he's really into traumas, and he uses like color recycling. He's into reflexology, a lot of really interesting ways to release trauma. But he's a big fan of yawning and stretching to release trauma. He says those are the two best ways.
Yeah.
And, I've been painting, and that's really therapeutic. Like, as I'm painting, I feel like my brain firing up in different ways, like areas that usually aren't active.
Yeah, there's been a few times where I'll be at like a friend's house where it's like a small party or something, and like having a couple of drinks and everyone's having fun, and I'm sitting with this like Zen coloring book. It has like all the little, and I'm just sitting here coloring, like having great conversation, but like coloring this book, and I'm kind of like I'm like a crazy person right now. I should be just having fun with everyone, but this is too enjoyable.
That's cool. I have to start doing that. Yeah, I grew up with a lot of art, so sculpting, coloring. It's a great thing, I think, to especially people like us. I think we're like very intellectual, always studying, and so it's so important to have that art piece, right?
Yeah, because the intellect and the logical thinking is beta brainwaves, which is basically the highest natural brainwaves. And then when you do things like that, when you drive, when you perform art, when you do something that's like a monotonous, slow task that kind of slows your brain down, you move into that alpha wave. And I think that the most important thing for intellectuals who are constantly in that like think mode is to be able to slow down and really get outside of the thoughts, outside of the context, because the thoughts it's amazing to have a powerful machine, but if you're stuck inside of the machine and not able to use it, then it's gonna be rough. If you can get outside of the machine and get on top of it and actually use it the way it's meant to be used, and you have a powerful machine, that's awesome. You're gonna be able to do amazing things. But if you let the machine overcome you, then you're gonna be stuck in some problems.
Well said. Yeah. Next month or the coming months this year, I'm probably going to get really into gardening, because I was into that a little bit when I was younger, because my mom got me into it. And that's just a great little thing to get the mind out of the way, just planting seeds and stuff. So
exactly. Yeah.
Someone's asking, how can you lose weight while eating more food? Saturated fat and carbs. I get a lot of messages from people like, I'm gaining weight, increasing my carbs. And you have a great video on the metabolism, and I think people are rushing it, right? They might be adding in too many carbs too quickly, and it takes months, right, to get back into balance.
It does. There are ways to. I think the biggest thing is that if you're under a stress and you start adding more carbs in, that the initial thing that's going to happen is you're not going to be sensitive to insulin. And so you're going to have some transition time. It's going to be a little bit rough. When bears hibernate, they actually come out of the hibernation in the springtime in full-blown diabetic state. They don't respond to insulin at all. And the reason that we colloquially think of honey when we think of bears is because when they come out of hibernation, bears will go eat honey and within a week or two be completely healed from their diabetic state. And the reason is because honey has glucose and fructose. And fructose can be used by the cells without insulin. It doesn't need insulin in order to be used. So if you're in a diabetic state, you can actually get your cellular machinery for respiration back up to speed by consuming fructose, which will get into the cell and actually have those effects, whereas glucose will still be blocked from getting inside of the cell. So I think that there's definitely a need for increasing carbs slowly, making sure you're including good sources of sugar. That doesn't mean you just go get a bunch of white sugar and dump it into everything that you're eating. I did that for a while and I got fat, so it did not work. But things like honey, I think, are really, really important. Saturated fat, I think there's a misconception that it somehow has more calories than polyunsaturated fats or other oils. And that's just not true. Butter and coconut oil, I think that they're really great for building up strength. I don't think that if you're trying to lose fat, I think that going a little bit lower on those things while keeping the carbs a little higher is the way to go. But honestly, when it comes to trying to lose fat while boosting your metabolism, what I have really found has been so beneficial for me is not doing full-blown intermittent fasting, but doing an undereating phase and an overeating phase. So during the day, having just fruit, doing like a fruit fast, having some bone broth, keeping it really light, basically all the foods that you could use to heal your body, to restore your digestive system. And if you want to think about it, all day long, you're prepping your body for this big overeating meal at night. And so you're prepping your digestive system, giving it all the healing stuff it needs, giving all the stuff that's going to help your body get back up to speed. And then at night, you have this nice, huge meal, turn on all of those anabolic factors, get the insulin going, get the cyclic GMP ramped up. And from there, getting all the healing and the muscle growth and all that good stuff. And then that is preparing you for the next cycle, which is the rest, where now your digestive system is resting and you're rehealing it with more of these fruits and bone broth and things like that. And I think that back and forth cycle is really, really helpful for fat loss because it kind of gets the machinery running without necessarily having a high caloric load all day long, which is going to have a high propensity to store fat.
Wow, that was awesome. Yeah, I've had friends that were healing their gut with just like a bone broth fast. Mm-hmm. And I consume a lot of bone broth, I don't know, 20 plus ounces a day, maybe 24. And I think the mistake people make with intermittent fasting is they're having nothing, right? Stevia and their little tonic elixirs or coffee or whatever. But like you said, fruit and bone broth, I mean, you're getting your sugar and you're getting your protein. And even though it's super light, it's still nourishing your system, right?
Definitely. And there's even a benefit I think, to having a little bit of food versus just a full fast. A lot of people want to go to the extreme and say, no, if insulin's not completely low, then you're not getting all of the benefits from intermittent fasting. And I think with people with a low metabolism, the problem there is that you're actually shutting down. But if you can stay underfed without shutting down, that's where the benefits from fasting come from. And a simple way you can tell this is if you have absolutely no appetite at all, that's usually a sign that you're starting to shut down. If you're like slightly hungry and you feel really light throughout the day, which eating these foods, having like bone broth, having an apple, having some honey mixed in with warm water and some lemon, like those will keep you feeling light, and they'll also keep you slightly hungry. So you feel empty, and that's a good like turned on feeling where your body's still working really well, but you're also consuming far less calories than you're burning throughout the activities of the day. So it's like this balance where you're able to keep the machinery running without shutting down all the way.
That's awesome. I love that. Let me see. The next two questions were kind of the same on weight. A lot of people are curious about weight loss without messing up their blood sugar level and thyroid, but you kind of covered that.
I think that's the hardest thing for people. I've done a lot of thinking on this, like how to, for people like me and you who have like researched all this stuff and really dove into it, it is easier to say, oh yeah, this new thing or this thing that ties in these pieces together. But for the layperson who is concerned about weight gain, who is concerned about thyroid or insulin sensitivity, who is concerned about their metabolism as they age, it's a little harder to just jump them all the way into the deep end and all this stuff. So it's like, how can we actually walk them into that and get them those results as quickly as possible without necessarily having them gain 40 pounds because they're in recovery mode? Like that's what I did. I was doing a Matt Stone diet, which was basically eat everything, gained 40 pounds, and it did not make me healthier. It really didn't. And it was a hard time coming back to it. I think there's a much more gentle way to start moving into this stuff in a way that makes more intuitive sense rather than just like dousing everything in tons of butter and white sugar,
Ice cream. I feel good on ice cream, but I don't need it the whole thing. Yeah. Do you think that vitamin E could help? Not to make it another sales pitch, but it seems like progesterone deficiency and estrogen dominance is that's usually an aspect of weight gain, right?
Yeah, for sure. That and cortisol. I think that's kind of the difference between if you store hip fat hip and leg fat versus more of like the belly fat and the visceral fat. There's actually a good video from there's a guy, Athlean X, on YouTube that I follow, who does a really good explanation of exercise. If anyone who's interested in like exercise and fitness, he does a really good explanation of a lot of different stuff in that realm. And he has a video talking about the differences of fat gain for men and for women. And a lot of that is because of hormonal differences. But what you just said, though, is super important, because progesterone mainly for women and also testosterone for men are those protective steroids that are actually really, really helpful. But those can be converted one more step into estrogen and cortisol. And so what we're really looking at is there's this like peak of these hormones that if we can capture them in that high state, then we are in great health. But if we allow them to continue to convert into estrogen or cortisol, then we've moved into the stress metabolism, and now we're starting to degrade things over a long term.
That's awesome. Is it Athlean-X? Is that the channel?
Yep, that's it. Yep.
8 million. Okay.
Yeah, he has a ton of followers. Yeah, he's good. I think he's a Ryan Reynolds trainer.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah.
I'll check it out. Stretch marks, do you have any ideas on how to reduce those? I would say systemic enzymes, but I don't know.
See, that's interesting. Topical. So the interesting thing with stretch marks is they are healable, but you need a carrier to take vitamin E or the medium chain triglycerides, those healing components, past the subcutaneous layer past the whatever the outer layer, the epidermis, past that into where the middle piece of the skin that's like torn. Mm-hmm. And it's hard to do that. So I think that if you were to take like vitamin E, medium chain triglycerides, and then maybe some honey, mix all those together, and then rub those on your skin, if they could get through to the skin in that place, then I think it would have a lot of benefit. But I think that if there's a way to have some sort of carrier that could take it through the skin, it would be way more effective. So I'm not entirely sure on a protocol for that, but if anyone wants to try what I just said, I think that'd be a really interesting experiment.
Crush some aspirin in there. No, just kidding.
Yeah, actually, you probably could do that too. Yeah. I used to take Epsom salt baths, and I would put like honey and sugar and like aspirin and stuff. I like put all that in the water and just like soak in it for a while.
That's awesome. Does getting your tubes tied affect your metabolism and weight loss?
It shouldn't, to my knowledge. I believe all the hormones still work the same way. Just because the egg's not moving through I don't think it changes the hormones. But I'm not an expert in that field, so I'm not 100% sure.
Metabolism and PCOS. PCOS is like picture perfect estrogen dominance, right? Or excess estrogen. Yeah,
for sure. That's all hormones. It's basically what I was just saying before about the protective steroids getting converted down into the stress steroids. And the big thing with the steroid hormones is that when you think about hormonal health, you can think of all the short-term hormones like adrenaline and insulin and glucagon. Those are all regulating your energy use and metabolism and stress in the short term, short to medium term, within like hours. And then the steroids are doing the same thing, but over the long term. So they're basically the seasonal hormones, if you want to think about it that way. When we go into the winter, we know that the next couple months are going to be cold. And so the steroids will reflect we're going into a time of scarcity and lack. So we're going to up the estrogen and cortisol, and we're going to keep those steroids high to kind of signal to the body, don't come out of this protective stress, low metabolism state until we are sure through repetitive abundance and repetitive warmth and repetitive whatever that the summer is coming. And so now we can move back into the helpful steroid place.
That's interesting, because I've heard different, like the dominant perspective in the natural health community is it's seasonally, it makes sense to eat less carbs in the winter. But Ray Peat says the opposite. You need he actually says to take thyroid more in the winter and eat more carbs in the winter. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think that it's an interesting. We got to come out of this into a higher context in order to really understand it. What's really happening is that your body's moving in this natural cycle based on the seasons. And one of those cycles is a cycle that if your body has a weak link somewhere, well, that weak link is going to get broken because it's a time of scarcity and lack. There's a time of extra pressure and stress on your system. And so by having thyroid or by having more carbs, you can help to mitigate some of that effect that's happening. I don't see anything wrong with that. I think that there are certain times that controlling the system too much can be detrimental. And then there's other times where maybe you need to let it go through its cycles. Like I was just saying with the undereating, overeating, two of the main cellular factors that determine the way that your hormones work are cyclic AMP and cyclic GMP, and they both potentiate each other. So when cyclic AMP is up, which is the main causes for it are things like fasting, undereating, dieting, exercise, all like these kinds of stresses, that it actually increases the signal for steroid hormone synthesis. But those steroid hormones are not actualized until cyclic GMP gets turned on. And cyclic GMP gets turned on through the parasympathetic nervous system with things like big meals, carbs, rest, relaxation, that kind of stuff. And so I think there's a really good argument for it being like a piston where one pushes and it activates the other, and then that next piston is pushed and that reactivates the initial piston. And so you get this back and forth action going on that spins the gears of the machine. And so it's like you want to have cyclic AMP activation and then cyclic GMP activation, cyclic AMP activation, cyclic GMP activation, because they're both helping potentiate each other. If you get too far into cyclic GMP, then you're just going to get overweight and you're not going to actually potentiate or get the signal for all those steroids to be produced. If you have cyclic AMP overdone, now you're just moving into the stress state and you're not actually going to be actualizing those steroid hormones that are being signaled. And so it's like you need both. You need the signal and you need the actualization at the same time.
That was awesome. Yeah, it's interesting. Like a lot of the keto carnivore people are obsessed with like growth hormone. Mm-hmm. And it's a fascinating compound. I used to have a book that was all about GH and how it's like the fountain of youth. You know, I think that might have even been the name of the book. But
yeah,
focusing too much on growth hormone, you know, it's kind of like nitric oxide, right? It might not be as good as we think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and it's also hard because I think even in the rapey community, there is still a certain demonization of certain molecules that I don't think is helpful for the long term. It's a step in the right direction to move away from what the mainstream is preaching, but it still isn't necessarily viewing the entire big picture of everything. Nitric oxide is necessary, and it has a lot of really good factors that it is needed for. But if it is far too high and in a context that isn't appropriate, then it's going to cause cancer. Then it's going to cause death and early aging and inflammation. It's when, specifically with nitric oxide, it's when it's in the context of high CO2, which means high respiration, that nitric oxide will be okay. It's actually a really helpful compound in that situation. So it's not as simple as just saying, this is bad, let's suppress this at all costs. It's a matter of what's the actual bigger picture happening here? How can we move this in the direction that we want to move it in?
I love that. It's a much more balanced approach. Someone's asking dietary supplements for immune health. I guess, I mean, immune health comes back to hormones, right?
Yeah, I actually think it has a lot to do with antioxidant status. So vitamin C, obviously, that's the big one. There's vitamin C is also important for the adrenals as well. Vitamin E, glutathione, that's your antioxidant system. Vitamin E, vitamin C, glutathione, that's the basic pathway that your body uses to neutralize free radicals. So I think that's really important. As far as actually keeping like white blood cell count high and stuff like that, I think that, you know, having the undereating phase, like I was saying, is still important for that because it helps to clear out all the debris and helps to increase those white blood cells a little bit more. When I did start intermittent fasting, I noticed that I stopped getting sick pretty much. Again, you know, we were saying we both had experiences of going too far with it, but I think that doing something where it's like an undereating phase, overeating phase, I think that's really helpful for the immune system. Other than that, you know, just staying healthy and belief. You know, do you think that you're going to get sick? Like, are you worried about getting sick? Because then you're going to get sick. I'm just going to tell you right now, you're going to get sick.
That's awesome. And you wouldn't recommend supplementing glutathione, right? Because a lot of people are like into liposomal glutathione supplements. And
I've never really looked into supplementing with it, to be honest with you. Yeah. What's your experience with that?
I think it's best if our body makes it. I know there's a relationship with iron. I think iron overload will decrease the amount of glutathion. But
That would make sense actually,
the
because
liver makes it, right?
well, because reduced iron acts like a free radical in a lot of ways. So basically, it's taxing your antioxidant system, and so therefore lowering natural stores of glutathione. Yeah, that makes sense.
Wow. Yeah, I've been obsessed with like gray hair because I see like a lot of these biohackers like pretty young, like maybe late 30s, and they're like turning full gray. And I think I think that's mostly iron overload. I think just iron toxicity is like overlooked in the natural health community as like a root cause.
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, I'm just waiting for like all the crazy biohackers that have taken it too far. That like in 20 years, we're gonna see some crazy like mutations and shit like that. I'm excited for it.
That's awesome. Let me see. So this is kind of a reverse question: how to gain weight in a healthy way. That's kind of been my issue, and I noticed like eating more potatoes and more red meat kind of helps me. But what's the true reason behind being too skinny? How to gain weight?
It's the true reason behind being too skinny. I have a friend who I was actually, when I was young, I was an ectomorph, so I was pretty skinny too. And I have a friend who actually was who teaches people how to gain weight. And I mean, a lot of it has to do with being able to produce enough calories, or I mean, to be able to eat enough calories and to turn that calorie into muscle. I don't know that I have an answer off the top of my head for that, because I want to actually think about that, because there is a metabolic and a bioenergetic reason, or biochemical reason for it. And I don't know that I have enough right now to speak eloquently on it. So I think I might wait and answer that question if we ever get to do another podcast together.
Definitely. Yeah. It could be high stress, right? Because that could cause weight gain or weight loss.
Yeah, true. It's a matter of maybe someone having high stress, high adrenals, and then not necessarily shutting down their metabolism, but blocking the testosterone and blocking the hormones that are responsible for muscle growth.
Interesting.
I tend to also see that a lot of the skinnier people tend to be more triggerable, more sensitive to the nervous system. I know that like when I was a kid, I was very like my nervous system was sensitive to stimuli. So if like lights and sounds, I was much more sensitive to that than most people. And I think that a lot of the reason that people skinny people might have trouble gaining weight could have to do with the fact that a workout is having far more of an effect on them because their nervous system is more sensitive. So if you really think about it, there's two components to all exercise and muscle, and that is the nervous system, which is the signal for the muscle to contract. And then there's the actual contractile fibers, the muscle fibers that are contracting. And so that's why we can have really, really strong people who aren't that big and really, really big people who aren't that strong. It's because there's two different parts of the equation when we're talking about muscle contraction. And so I think that the nervous system of skinny people gets burnt out before their muscle cells have actually gotten the stimulus for growth. And so that's why they have a hard time when they're lifting. And I'm not sure the exact protocol for this. Maybe it would be something like heavy weights, but not to failure. I think that failure for ectomorphs is probably not necessarily a good thing. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, digestion, because I think that if you're not absorbing the calories correctly, then you're not going to actually be using them in the way that you should. And I think that also on that point, that a lot of people might be dealing with different forms of digestive issues. But with ectomorphs, I know like they're trying to eat more food. So they're constantly trying to eat more. And if you're not digesting it, then you're going to be creating some problems in your system. So
yeah, maybe that's where like supplementing enzymes or a little bit of HCl can help, just as like a kind of a boost, right, to digest more.
I think so. I think that when you have that big meal and you feel bloated, if you can have like one of the things from betaine HCl is that it'll actually help you feel less bloated after a meal, because it actually like turns your stomach into like an incinerator. Like anything you put in, it just burns up right away.
Probably good on a date, right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like get gassy and and this is kind of on the same vein, how to raise low human growth hormone without being able to exercise. Probably getting good sleep, right?
Really good sleep. Probably doing the undereating would help, because growth hormone does raise from undereating. I think that undereating and making sure you're getting good sleep is probably the best remedy for that,
And when
honestly.
you say undereating, you like that's in the context of still getting all your protein and all your sugar, right? But just
Definitely.
the calories is just slower.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The way that I would view it is that I don't necessarily like to calorie count. I like to really listen to my body. And if it's saying eat less, then there's probably a reason. So I'm not going to try to force it out of that. I'm going to
Mhm.
work with it until I can understand it. And I think that if, uh, if you're doing that, if you're listening to your body and you'll find the natural calorie balance. But what I'm talking about is undereating during the day, just having fruit and maybe some honey and some water and bone broth, all those healing things that don't provide a ton of calories, but do allow you to continue burning carbs and continue using protein to heal without adding any fat into your bloodstream at all. And then using that to prepare yourself for the big meal at night. And then over the course of the day, yeah, you're eating plenty of calories so that you've had enough to sustain you for the day. But doing that cycling in that way, I think is pretty helpful.
That's awesome. Women's metabolism, is there a difference with obviously with the hormones, but do you approach like with clients you work with women? Are there different like main things that you do differently or?
Not really. I
Mhm.
think that women have a higher fat percentage in general than men. And part of that is hormonal, but that also means that in general, their insulin sensitivity is going to be a little bit poorer. And and they also tend to be more susceptible to autoimmune diseases. And like we were just talking about with the whole conversation around winter, is that most autoimmune diseases come after a stress or after winter or after some sort of thing like that. And that the reason is not because some disease just magically cropped up. It's because the stress of, I've used this analogy before, that your body is like a link of chains, and the stress is like pulling apart that chain. And the more and more stress that comes on, well, one of those links of chain is going to break. One of them's weak. So whatever one the weak is, if it's your digestive system, you get celiacs. If it's your thyroid glands, you get Hashimoto's. Like there's a bunch of different ways that your body can express the weakness that's finally snaps from some sort of stress. And um, and so women tend to be more susceptible to that. So in general, the way that I kind of think is that women shouldn't approach it differently, but they should probably be a little softer with their changes than men, because I think men's bodies tend to be a little bit more like vigorous and able to handle those abrupt changes. You can experiment a little bit more and have less things go wrong, whereas women tend to be a little more sensitive to those kind of things, and so therefore you don't want to all of a sudden jump onto some crazy thing just to try it and then have everything go all wacky, you know?
Yeah. What do you think about like topical progesterone? 'Cause there's like Dr. John Lee's, there's Progest E, there's all these different, and some people say it's very safe, short term, in the peak community.
Yeah.
I know even some guys like Danny Roddy just slathers his legs with it all the time
Oh,
in
really? Yeah.
DHEA. Right. Do you think it's safe? Because it's from wild yam, but probably just long term, right? It's probably not
Yeah.
good.
I think progesterone's relatively safe as far as the hormones go.
Mhm.
Are you familiar with Idea Labs?
Yeah. Yeah.
Georgie supplement. Yeah.
Yeah.
I went a little too far down that rabbit hole for a while and was supplementing a little too much with a little too many things.
Just
And
like all these things.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And it took me a fair bit of time. I would say at least over a year to like really normalize myself after all of that. There was a lot of other stuff going on in my life at the time, so it wasn't necessarily like only that, but there was a lot that it kind of turned me off from trying to manipulate the steroid hormones directly. Having said that, taking progesterone can be very healing. I noticed my temperatures would go up. Um, I uh, I recommend it for people who want to just try it out for a little while for sure. But like all supplements, you don't want to stay on it for too long.
Yeah, I got my dad on pregnenolone, or at least I gave him a bottle. I don't know if he's taking it.
Yeah, and I think that's typically like the recommendation, right?
Yeah.
For men to use pregnenolone, for women to use progesterone.
Hmm. Okay, awesome. This is a good one. By which specific mechanisms does PUFA downregulate metabolism, and why doesn't saturated fat have this effect? Or it does, but to a lesser extent. So we kind of touched on this a little earlier, but
Hmm.
it blocks the oxidation of glucose, basically, right?
Yeah, the way that I would kind of view it is that if you have, the mitochondria is the machinery that's responsible for respiration. So if you have this mitochondria and you put the glucose on the conveyor belt and it goes through and it produces energy. So you're putting all this glucose on and it's going through. You put saturated fat on and it goes through and it burns. It doesn't produce as much carbon dioxide. It has a little bit different byproducts, but it burns and it's fine. The machine can handle it. Now you put this radioactive, unstable polyunsaturated fat on it and it goes through the machine and the machine starts to like jump and shake and smoke starts coming out of it a little bit and then it spits out like energy, but now it's a little unstable. And so it's like, okay, well now we put more glucose on, it's still doing it, but it's maybe not doing it as efficiently as it once was because you threw something into the machine that it wasn't really supposed to be processing. And to turn that analogy back into the chemistry, the polyunsaturated fats, the double bonds are far weaker than a single bond is. Saturated fat is full of single bonds. So the double bond can break and have the electrons separate into what we call free radicals, which means that those free electrons are looking for a pair and they'll steal it from other molecules and therefore damage those molecules. So when the polyunsaturated fats, those double bonds, what breaks them is the energy from heat, light, and oxygen. Well, what's happening in the mitochondria? You're producing tons of heat by combining these molecules with oxygen. So heat and oxygen is creating all these free radicals that are now stealing electrons from these important biomolecules within the Krebs cycle and the electron transport chain. And you're just kind of throwing this system for a loop. And now you need to heal from that. You need to heal the mitochondria. So basically, polyunsaturated fat is lowering the ability of the mitochondria to produce energy as they're supposed to. That's within the cell. As far as outside of the cell, there's, prostaglandin synthesis and a bunch of other things, that serotonin, a bunch of other like hormonal indicators, but those are all mediators for how the cell is going to respond. So at the base level, we're really talking about the mitochondria.
I love it. Yeah. And that was a great explanation. Thank you. And when you get into lipid peroxidation, it's like there's an iron component because iron actually activates the ALOX enzymes. They're ALOX, and there's like 4 of them. And those add oxygen to PUFA. And so I think people are missing this context of like acid rain increasing iron in the spring water and our bathing water, and what effect that has. Because people think you put this perfectly safe, whatever it is, fish oil, algae oil, krill oil, and it was protected, right? But it's going in your body, and you just said heat and oxygen, right? It's like it goes rancid and it causes this downstream of effects. I'm sure you've looked into acrolein. That's like a really scary one.
That's the main one from fish oil, which is it is a really scary one. And people I don't know how people are kind of missing this one. It's acrolein and HNE1. Those are like the 2 big ones from fish oil that are pretty scary.
Yeah. And the scariest part too, there's no studies. There's 20,000 plus studies on the benefits, but it's because it feeds the cancer industry, right? That's my understanding. There's not going to be a definitive study that says, these PUFAs are toxic, because it would harm the profit.
Yeah, I mean the entire argument about like the vegetable oils being used as paint varnish for the longest time until they stopped using it. And now they needed a new market. Like it's kind of mind blowing when you kind of see those things. As far as the positive studies with fish oil, that's actually something I really do want to dive into because, I really like to look at all these different ideas, and Ray Peat is usually pretty spot on with a lot of things, or at least he gives you another angle to look at. And I think that is super important because if you can go in with an objective eye and not be identified with your position, now you're free to see if there actually is a better position. And so I currently do not recommend taking fish oil. I can't see from a very foundational level how it could be good for the system in the long run. However, like you said, there are certain studies that show some benefits. So what's going on there? Why is that happening? I think it's worth looking at that. And of course, yes, there's corrupt studies, so you have to actually look and see, like, is this study legit or is it not? But either way, there's still something worth looking into there.
Yeah, Adam Bergstrom says it's like doing chemotherapy. It's like there's a short-term benefit, but you get in the long term, it's a harm.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that's actually a good way to think of it.
This is a good one. What's a sample day of optimal eating? What times to eat and what should we be eating at each time? I think that's kind of a heady way. Like my friend Josh Rubin, he says just get carbs and proteins with every meal. And you mentioned fruit and bone broth. That's like a really easy start, right?
Yeah.
I eat a lot of potatoes, like those.
It's definitely something that people want a formula. And there's if you want a formula, it's like giving somebody like a plastic diamond. If you want like the real diamond, like get intuitive with your body, start to like really get in touch with it's amazing when you can really get to that level. But if you want something just to start, like a starting place, I'd say wake up, have warm bone broth with some mixed in collagen if you can, maybe some turmeric and some salt and black pepper. That's a great way to start your day, nourishing on an empty stomach. A few hours later, when you start to feel a little hungry, have an apple. If you're still, apple will probably actually make you feel light and empty. And so in the next couple hours, if you want to have some more fruit, some berries, maybe a banana or something like that. And then about an hour before you're going to start eating like your bigger meals at night, which would probably be around like somewhere in like the 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock range. So maybe around like 4 o'clock, heat up some water, put some lemon and some salt in it with some honey and dissolve that, sip on that. And then when you have your big meal, basically make sure you're getting lots of carbs from like starches, some good fats, some good proteins. This is kind of like, it's free. It's up to you. Whatever you feel like you really want to eat is great to eat. I actually like to have my salad. I've been playing around with this actually, having my salad after the main course. It's what the French and the Italian do because the insoluble fiber helps to push through the food that you ate from the big meal. So what I've been trying to do is have a big meal, an hour or two later, have like a salad, and then have a dessert after that. Usually that's pretty good. At that point you're feeling pretty good and you're ready for sleep. And then I would not eat about 3 hours before bed because I think that there's some benefits to going to bed a little light and a little bit in that not needing your body to expend all this energy digesting.
That was awesome. Yeah, I noticed the difference when I have just like a bowl of ground beef versus with a raw carrot or some type of a fiber. And Dr. Cass Ingram I've had on the show says that like have the salad and the burger. And I don't think there's a lot of nutritional benefit to a salad, but it's more just the bulking of it, right? I mean, that's the main part.
There's definitely nutrients. I mean, vegetables definitely have some good nutrients. But
maybe
the
I'm
fiber
programmed by the carnivores. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, there's good phytochemicals. Yeah, it's just I don't know. I always recommend people grow it themselves with filtered water in a greenhouse because there's like biosludge, tap water, acid rain. There's so much that goes into even organic. It's sad, but we do our best, right?
And I think that, I mean, that's definitely true. I think that plants are safer though than meat in that regard. If I were only going to buy anything organic, I would make sure it was meat because the vegetables, they do have their own detoxifying systems, but the animals are eating all of those plants times 10 and then storing it in fat that you're going to be eating, storing it in the fat and the muscle that you're going to be eating. So they basically concentrate the toxins, whereas the plants are much less, they're much more diluted, much less toxins. Yes, of course, obviously, like you want to try to find your locally produced, like as best you can, vegetables. But the question is how far do you want to go down the rabbit hole? And when do you decide that like this is good enough?
I like it. How to reverse hair loss. I know Danny Roddy has like hair like a fox, and this is a really misunderstood topic, right? There's so many different opinions on hair loss.
I think, I mean, Danny's book, for anyone who hasn't read it, is amazing. I think it's still free. I think he had it free for a while. So if anyone wants to go read that, it's not just about hair loss. So if you are someone who's like, oh, that's not me, I don't need a hair, like go read it anyway. It's just amazing. It has lots of good physiology and biochemistry in it. I think that hair loss, and I'm probably only quoting Danny Roddy. I'm going to be honest with you. I'm probably just quoting his stuff right now. But I think that the main cause of hair loss is obviously going to be stress, but it also comes from like that overthinking mentality and from being too high strung. And so I think when it comes to hair loss, the best way to approach it is actually emotionally to really start letting go. And when I say letting go, what I really mean is first start paying attention to your thoughts and your emotions throughout the day. Most people don't even realize that they have emotions. They're so suppressed that they're just all thought. They think that they're just a thinking being and that is it. But once you start paying attention to your feelings, you'll recognize that you're actually a thinking and feeling being. And not only that, but you are not a thinking being that feels. You are actually a feeling being that thinks. And that switch in paradigms there is super important, because the emotions tell you some very, very important truths that you're blocking and going off trail with mental stuff. And so I think that if you're someone who is worried about hair loss, then paying attention to those emotions throughout the day and then starting to allow them to be there and release them is actually going to help a lot with being able to actually change the biochemical state that is causing the hair loss to happen in the first place. So that would be my take on it. If I didn't want to dive too much into the actual physiology and whatever of it, because I think that if anyone wants it, they can go to Danny's site and check out that stuff too.
That's awesome. Yeah, like what good is it to be like a rich or wealthy genius but not be at peace, right? It's like the peace of mind and like the emotional stability is the foundation. So you could have all the knowledge in the world, but it's like if you don't have that foundation,
and then the real big argument is like we think that all of our thinking is getting us somewhere and that we're making all this progress. Progress for what? Like what's the point of all of this to begin with? Like why are we even alive? Are we trying to get something done? Like, no, that's absolutely not why we're here. We're here to enjoy the experience of life and learn and grow and like have all these experiences. And so if you're just going to block all joy because you're trying to get something done, then it's like, is it really what's best for everyone? Like there's a way to get stuff done in that sense and be happy. And you're going to actually be able to get more done and make sure that what you're doing is actually in alignment with what actually is good for everyone, versus going off in your own little hole and being identified with your thoughts and then thinking that you're actually accomplishing something when really you're creating the next atom bomb that's going to blow up millions of people. You know what I mean? Like you don't know what's really best unless you're starting to pay attention to the bigger picture and starting to pay attention to the totality of your being that is more than just the thinking mind.
I love it. That's really cool. What do you have an opinion on 5G?
5G?
Yeah, or like EMFs, I guess, in general.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
people are freaking out about that. Yeah.
Yeah, I have a friend who actually is really into EMF research. He got one of those, it's like an EMF detector, like went around his house and like was seeing like where the hot spots were and stuff like that.
Was it a tri-field meter, like the little
I think so.
needle?
Yeah. Yeah, and so I haven't really hung out with him since he got it, but I want to check it out because I want to see, like, just for fun, to see where things are. I think if it's something that you feel like is really important, I wouldn't approach it from fear. I would approach it from a perspective of knowing that your body can handle a lot. And if you're worrying about it, you're actually making your body vulnerable to it. So if you don't worry about it, you're actually in a much better place to handle it. From that perspective, if you start to do some experiments, see where some EMF spots are, maybe try turning your phone off next to your bed and see if you sleep better. Like that's something that I found works. I wouldn't go to the standpoint of like disconnecting your Wi-Fi and like living like a hermit. I don't think that necessarily that's the way to go either. Having said that, I wouldn't buy a house that's under electrical lines either. That's not going to be good. That kind of electromagnetic radiation is not going to be good for you either. So, yeah, I think it's just kind of like you gotta play with it and approach it from a good mind state.
I like that. Yeah, like do your best, don't stress about it. Like,
exactly. Yeah. You really do become more vulnerable to things when you stress about them. Like you're actually becoming more vulnerable to them. Your body has these built-in systems that if you don't block them, it'll actually do a good job of handling it.
I've seen that in friends. Yeah, they just become so obsessed with, whether it's vaccines or whatever. They just get so siloed. And I've been there, just go down a rabbit hole too deep and then you just get wound up.
The only reason I can say those kind of things is because I have been down those rabbit holes, just like you said. Exactly. Yeah.
Well, let me see. We might have time for this one. What's the main cause of leptin and insulin resistance? Because this is the main argument against sugar, and it's PUFA, right?
Yeah. And I think that a lot of it has to do with specifically the PUFA in your liver, which is blocking your liver from using sugar to store it as glycogen and instead converting it into fat within the liver. And then that fatty liver is having the effects on leptin and insulin. because the liver is really the central organ. Like is so involved in everything. And the hormones ghrelin and leptin are going to be definitely influenced by insulin and by the fat content of your liver. So the polyunsaturated fats are probably the way that the main area, that and iron, like we've talked about, and any other like free radical stresses, inflammatory stresses, and things like that. As far as, yeah, I mean, I think that's probably the best answer that I can give is probably liver fat. Take your choline, make sure you're eating plenty of protein and eggs so that you can actually export that fat. Make sure your thyroid's high so you can turn it into the steroid hormones. And then leptin will fall where it's supposed to be, and you won't really need to worry about that. I will say one cool little study that I had heard at one point, that doing sprints on an empty stomach, even just one sprint, caused an increase in leptin for the entire day. So, and leptin is responsible for satiety and for regulating body weight and things like that. So I think like it's interesting to think about the whole paradigm of fasted workouts, and especially something like sprinting, which is going to be a different stress than weightlifting. You know, like sprinting is moving your body through space. There's a certain psychological component to it as well. So, yeah, if you're worried about leptin, whoever is asking this question, I would definitely look into that study around like sprinting and maybe try fasted exercise and see how that makes you feel.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends that are trying to lose weight by running up mountains, like, running on a hike and just jogging, I guess it's called, every morning or whatever. And
jogging or jogging?
Yeah, it's a great line. Yeah. But really high intensity in sprinting is less stressful to the system because it's really the long endurance, right? Doesn't that like shrink the organs and stress the system?
Yeah, I mean, again, it all comes back to balance. I've kind of been playing with an idea that there might be an argument for longer distance, or what you might call medium intensity steady state training or whatever, because of the fact that you are burning carbs through the respiratory metabolism at a higher rate, and so you actually are producing a lot more carbon dioxide from doing those longer term workouts. The question is, how does that fit into the bigger picture, and are you like tanking your testosterone by doing that? I think if you're doing 3-hour runs, weekly and running every day for these long distances, then that's going to start to have an effect. But if you do one, half hour to 45-minute jog at a steady state, and then you mix that in with some sprinting and some lifting and then some walking, I think you're going to be well-rounded and probably pretty healthy.
Would you say it's more important, because my mind goes to, it's more important to have carbs if you're going to do like an hour and a half run, versus short intensity, right? You
Absolutely.
Can get away a little bit with less carbs. Or
I would agree 100%. Yeah.
Awesome. That's really interesting about the CO2 and using generating more of that. I never thought of it in that context. That's kind of cool.
Because if you can kind of like give that little kick up in oxygen consumption and respiration for an hour, like the rest of your day, you're probably going to be respirating a lot better. So I think it probably helps. Again, it matters whether this overall stress is too high or not. You have people like Michael Phelps, like the swimmer and stuff like that, who are eating the 10,000 calories a day. And like all these people that clearly like they're doing those kinds of exercises and they're okay. The long distance runners, maybe they don't seem to be as healthy. So maybe there's something going on there that's different. I don't know.
Maybe it's his bong rips too. Maybe that helps.
The CBD is all the rage nowadays.
That's a crazy fad right now. Yeah, it's really interesting. I like magnesium better, but
I do too. Actually, I agree. Yeah, magnesium.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show, Tim. This was a lot of fun. I definitely want to have you back on, and I'm sure people will get a lot out of this little FAQ. It's a lot of good questions, a lot of good answers you gave. So
yeah, thank you, man. Yeah, I'm glad to do this. I'd be happy to come back and answer more questions. I'm sure you had. I think that people had given you a lot more than that, right? Yeah. So we'll definitely have to come back for round 2 and hit all the other questions.
Let's do it, man. Well, yes, stick around, and I'm going to close out the show.
Okay, cool. Sounds good, man.
Well, that wraps up today's show. Hope you guys enjoyed it. I love how Tim has a different perspective on food frequency, because this is a point of debate with a lot of people, especially in the community that is aware of the liver storing glycogen for a reason and food frequency. and having sugar, protein, and saturated fat as God designed it in a balanced way. I like that Tim really talks about something different, which is kind of not restricting sugar, so still having, some milk and some orange juice and things that work for you, some bone broth throughout the day, and then eating at night. So I kind of disagree with that as far as what works for me, but this is really something that you have to experiment with. I have experimented pretty extensively with a lot of liquids in place of solid food, and I find for me, it tends to mess with my bowel movements as far as regularity and consistency and that whole deal. So I definitely like having solid food for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And even if it's something light, like my friend Josh Rubin has, sprouted bread with some fruit or fruit with some bone broth. It doesn't have to be this giant meal every time you eat. And I think that's the important thing to get across. I restricted snacking for many years because I thought that was decreasing my lifespan, right? I'm restricting protein, so I'm not activating AMPK and all of these domino effects, right? I'm restricting sugar, which supposedly creates advanced glycation end products and all these issues and ages us. But it's actually those things supporting energy metabolism, which actually helps with anti-aging and longevity. That's my current understanding anyway. And I find that it's working for me. I find that I'm more resilient to stress than ever. I have more energy than ever. And my brain is functioning on all cylinders all the time. So it's awesome. So definitely check out Tim's work. And him and I agree on pretty much everything. I love his videos. And he actually has a great series on gut health on his Patreon, which I'll link below. I'll also link his YouTube channel below. There's a lot of really great content. So definitely check him and his work out. I think it's really awesome what he's doing, because there's not enough people talking about these things: lipid peroxidation, PUFA, sugar, metabolism, carbon dioxide. These are really important to get down because I think they are foundational for health. So his Patreon is Amplified Vitality, as well as his YouTube. And I'll put the links below to go direct to them. And if you want to support the show, you can go to matt-blackburn.com. And I have all my recommended products that I personally use and have benefited from. And I'm constantly updating them. And most of them have discount codes, so it's pretty cool. Also, my brand is mitolife.co. And I have 3 enzyme products: a systemic, a digestive, and a gluten enzyme product. I just released Mitolife Panacea, which are shilajit resin tablets, which are pure from Russia. And then the 5th product is actually PUFA Protect, which just released this week. And PUFA Protect is a non-GMO sunflower-derived vitamin E source in the form of D-alpha tocopherol. And it also has mixed tocopherols in there, so it's not synthetic and it's actually balanced. Because with vitamin E, there's 8 forms. There's 4 tocopherol and 4 tocotrienols. But the tocopherols, and specifically the alpha tocopherol, is what the body prefers. The liver actually preferentially uses that form of vitamin E. And I could have a whole show, I probably will, on the benefits of vitamin E. We talked about it a little bit in this show, Tim and I. But I've been taking it for a while, especially since I've learned this information about lipid peroxidation and how that plays into iron overload and lipofuscin and all of the degradation that happens to our hormonal balance. A lot of it's caused by estrogen. Estrogen is actually a stress hormone. It's not a female hormone. Progesterone is the female hormone. And PUFA, polyunsaturated fatty acids, when they go into a body with heat and oxygen, like the human body, 98.6 degrees, they oxidize. And you might say, oh, the body has antioxidant defense systems, and yeah, we have C and E, but are we getting those in our diet? And are those PUFAs coming into a body that has iron poisoning? The answer 99.9% of the time is yes. And I've looked at iron tests from clients. The Full Monty Iron Panel is where the rubber meets the road. And I think that it's a blanket statement that is worth making, that 99% of people have iron overload/poisoning. And iron adds oxygen to PUFA. That's the kicker right there. So when you have a seafood diet, you're supplementing with algae oil, which is complete poison, or krill oil or fish oil or seal oil, and you're taking in these concentrated, you can call them vegetable oils. That's really what algae oil is. It's a vegetable oil. And that causes cancer, diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, depression, anxiety, aging, wrinkles, gut disorders, stress. I could go down the list for an entire hour, 2 hours on that. But the primary cause of disease is oxygen not getting to the tissue. And what inhibits oxygen? Well, it's calcification from magnesium deficiency, because magnesium regulates calcium, and it's vitamin E deficiency from consuming PUFA for your entire life. So you discovered health when you were 30, 40. And what were you doing before then? Well, you're going out with your friends in high school to get what? Mexican food. And they cooked the tortilla in what? Canola oil. You got pizza cooked in canola oil. So these PUFAs, it's not just you stop them coming in and you're good. We were all, unless you were raised in the country on a farm, drinking right from the teat of a cow or a goat, you can just be assured that you're PUFA poisoned, because there was a concerted effort in this country to shift the trajectory of our health using fats and going from saturated animal fats to unsaturated, toxic vegetable oil extract fats like rapeseed, canola oil, corn oil, soybean oil, sunflower oil, safflower oil. These are all complete toxins. It's one thing if you have a handful or a little bit of nuts and seeds here and there. You have some grains with some PUFA, not a big deal. But when you're on a vegan diet, that's not a vegan diet. You're on a PUFA diet. And the only saturated fat in your diet is from coconut oil. And even there's some PUFA in coconut oil, which is, it's still worth having, but it's less than 10%. So you have to ask yourself, why was there a concerted effort to switch the American fats from lard, ghee, tallow, butter over to these toxic, unsaturated fats? And who cares if they're rancid outside of the body? Because people say, oh, consuming rancid oils. That's what 90% of the people in the health community say. Avoid consuming rancid oils. Guys, they turn rancid immediately when they go in an iron-poisoned body, aka everybody, because acid rain unnaturally liberates iron in excess amounts from the rocks that goes in the soil, that goes in the water, that goes in the water that your animals drink, water that the plant drinks. And you eat those animals, you eat those plants, whether it be muscle meat, whether it be salad with spinach and lettuce and kale. And what do you think? It was grown with tap water, with NPK fertilizer, and it has excess iron, because it's just like an animal. If you have the choice of eating poop or nothing, you're going to eat poop. You're going to eat whatever you can to survive. So plants are the same way. They're going to soak up whatever they can. It's not an intelligent thing where it's all structured water and it's filtered water and all of this vegan jargon that you hear about. It's not that simple. It's much more complex. And the soil cycles have been dramatically altered, and that's what people have to understand. When you stack NPK, nitrogen, phosphate, potassium, inorganic calcium with tap water, with biosludge, with acid rain, with geoengineering spraying, what do you get? You get the plants without a mineral cycle, without a carbon cycle, without a nitrogen cycle, and they're soaking up inorganics through the roots. You're eating rocks, guys. You're eating rocks, and you're getting tons of PUFA. So that's why I came out with my products. That was the inspiration for my line of Mitolife, because you have the Shilajit resin tablets, that fulvic acid, and the trace minerals that we never get in our food, copper included. The fulvic acid will go through and transmute any monovalent and divalent atoms, aka rocks, stuck in your tissue. And then I would recommend magnesium bicarbonate, which I don't carry as part of the protocol. And then I have systemic enzymes, which actually dissolve the fibrosis. I just got a message today from a friend saying this cyst she's had for 25 years on her head was itchy and red. And over the course of 24 hours of megadosing my enzymes, it actually grew and is going to pop. And she said she had multiple removed, like 2 or 3 of these surgically removed. And my enzymes in less than a week brought it down to being dissolved. So, a lot of people will say, oh, there's not enough research on serrapeptase and nattokinase. Guys, there's 20,000 studies on omega-3 DHA. Is that a good thing? More studies, the better? No. Right, it's not the case. It makes me happy that there's not thousands of studies on nattokinase and serrapeptase. And you know why? Well, it challenges the system, challenges the medical system, of course, because when you get oxygen to the tissue, what happens? You have energy production, the tissue can function, and you get health, you get balance. Not making claims at all. I'm just saying if you get rid of the calcification, the lipofuscin, and melt the fibrosis, dissolve it actually, then you get energy production in your pancreas, your liver, your thyroid, your lungs, your testes, your ovaries, wherever it is. And that is health in your brain, which is pretty important, I would say. So the PUFA Protect is made for not only when you consume PUFAs, like you want to have an energy bar and you look at the label and there's, it'll say fat content, right? And you could see how many grams of saturated to unsaturated fat. You'd be surprised how much of what you're consuming is half or more unsaturated fat. We really want to get up to a ratio of, say, 90% saturated to 10% unsaturated, something like that. But the more PUFA you consume, the higher your vitamin E requirement. And it can take 4 years. The numbers kind of vary. There's not definitive science on this, but if the PUFA is stuck in your tissue, it can take up to 4 years to get out. Multiple ways to do it, which I'll get into in further little shows here. But glucuronidation in the liver, that is the main process. And guess what? The keto carnivore and the vegan people are not getting that process done because one's restricting protein. They're both magnesium deficient. And the vegans don't have B vitamins. And the carnivore people don't have sugar. There's no glycogen. So you could see kind of how you can connect the dots. And this is my current understanding. Not saying I have it all figured out. I'm just passionate because this is where I've come to. And it's taken me 10 years to get here because this information is suppressed. All these fasting gurus, intermittent fasting, keto, paleo, all these different camps, they're not taking in balance and context. And eating PUFA diet for 20, 30 years of your life. Who cared when you discovered health? That PUFA is stored in your adipose. Now, what happens when you're stressed? Well, your cortisol eats your adipose. What happens when that happens? Well, you have free fatty acids coming out into the blood. And those free fatty acids in the blood, as Tim mentioned in this interview, create insulin resistance. They decrease insulin sensitivity. So everyone's insulin, stop sugar. Sugar's poison. Worried about the carbs and cheese when I'm getting my 16 burger patties in and out or whatever. We have to really think about things in terms of balance. And whenever you have iron, you have copper, like in beef flesh, animal tissue. Whenever you have PUFA, you have vitamin E. But there's a difference between a nut and a seed and vegetable oils, which you were raised on for 20, 30 years of your life before you even heard about PUFA. Didn't even know it was a thing. Didn't know it was toxic. Every doctor told you they were essential fatty acids, right? They're only essential for cancer, in fact. They're not essential. You know what is essential is saturated fat from meat and animal products, butter, ghee, eggs, red meat. Try to stay away from chicken and pork just because they don't have a way to detoxify PUFA like ruminant animals like elk, deer, bison, or cow. So you look at guys that look pregnant and what are they doing? They're drinking genetically modified out of aluminum can acid rain beer, right? And they're going to Chick-fil-A and they're going to these places where they're getting pollo asada, right? I see what people eat and it's all this garbage. It's all pork and chicken and beer. That's the recipe for a pregnant man. You look at their gut, it looks like they're about to give birth. That's because their estrogen's through the roof. They're not turning into a woman, they're turning stressed. And when a man is chronically stressed, they accumulate belly fat on their abdomen. That's where fat accumulates when a man's stressed. So really, vitamin E is an anti-stress compound that was suppressed because when vitamin E went under, fish oil took over. Vitamin E is the antidote to PUFA. It really is. Not to say eat all the PUFA you want and just take vitamin E and it's all good. No, but if you want to go out to eat with your friends, if you want to detoxify PUFA over the next 4 years, $35 per 3 months is not a bad thing. All you take is one cap. I have 90 capsules of PUFA Protect, 400 IUs once a day, 3 month supply, $35. That's pretty affordable. And you will actually, and if, with the foundational stuff, all the stuff you hear on the show, glycogen, protein, B vitamins, magnesium, get the liver functioning. All these people are taking milk thistle and all these herbs for the liver. How about we go to the foundational level? It's just glycogen. That's sugar, because the liver needs that fuel to do its 500 functions. Before we go to milk thistle and herbs and Dr. Sebi and all this stuff, let's just focus on the foundation. Honey, potatoes, maple syrup, wild rice. These are all amazing sources of, even white rice. I do fine with white rice. Stop being afraid of starch. It's really undercooked starch. And high fructose corn syrup, do you know that's 37% starch? It's not sugar that's the problem. That's the big programming. So all the blame that sugar gets, it's PUFA's fault. And you can take vitamin E when you go out to eat and they're cooking your steak in canola oil, or they're cooking your bun, like even these health conscious places like Burger Lounge in Southern California, cook their bun in 50% canola and butter. That's not good. So have PUFA Protect with you in your bag, in your purse, in your pocket, put it in a Ziploc bag. What I do is I take 1 gram of Shilajit, which is my product panacea. I take 1 digestive enzyme and usually 4 PUFA Protect, just because I'm extreme and I like extra protection. But usually 400 IUs is enough to neutralize 1 PUFA meal completely. And I mean completely. You're completely protected from PUFAs when you have vitamin E in your body. That's pretty incredible. But you don't have it in your body because you've been PUFA poisoned. So I have a little write-up on my website, and vitamin E just has so many effects that people don't know about. A lot of people know about tissue oxygenation and circulation and free radical damage. That's the boring stuff. What it really does is it reduces oxidation of lipid membranes by PUFAs, protects against lipid peroxidation. It actually increases the conversion of linoleic acid into saturated fat, which is incredible. It protects the skin from ultraviolet sun damage, because when you cook in the sun like a lizard and you have PUFA in your skin, that's a recipe for skin cancer. It really is. It's not even the carcinogens and the chemicals. It's the PUFA. And it improves mitochondrial respiration. It opposes all negative effects of estrogen, decreases vitamin A burn rate, decreases progesterone burn rate, and protects against calcification and iron overload. So I wrote pretty much an essay with some sources on the product description if you want to go read it. $35, it's one of the most affordable supplements. I wouldn't get one with rice bran oil. I wouldn't get one that's soy derived. So mine is free of both of those, and it's from sunflower. So really excited about that. I'll be talking more about it, but hope you guys enjoyed it. And today's quote is by Tim Burzens. It's easy to continue perceiving life through the lens of history. It's comfortable, but it's where death begins to creep in. The flow of life exists in the unknown and in the engagement with each present moment as it unfolds.